Before Black Sabbath, rock music could be loud, rebellious, and bluesy, but it rarely sounded truly dangerous. Then four musicians from Birmingham, England, took the noise of factories, the gloom of post-war streets, and the anxieties of a changing world, and turned them into something heavier than almost anything that had come before. Tony Iommi, Bill Ward, Geezer Butler, and Ozzy Osbourne did not set out with a neat blueprint for a new genre. They were young working-class musicians trying to make a sound that felt different, darker, and more powerful. What emerged from that search became one of the foundations of heavy metal. Their music moved slowly when others played fast, sounded ominous when others chased brightness, and used horror-inspired imagery not as a gimmick, but as atmosphere. Black Sabbath became more than a band. They became the moment rock music learned how to haunt. The story began in Birmingham in 1968, a city shaped by industry, metalwork, and hard labor. Guitarist Tony Iommi, drummer Bill Ward, bassist Geezer Butler, and vocalist Ozzy Osbourne first came together under names that now sound almost strange in hindsight: Polka Tulk Blues Band, then Earth. At first, they were part of the late 60s blues rock world, but something about that path felt too crowded. Many bands were already chasing the same psychedelic and blues influences. The future Black Sabbath needed a stronger identity. Their turning point came when they noticed how people willingly paid to be frightened by horror films. If audiences loved fear in cinemas, why couldn't a band create the musical equivalent? In 1969, they adopted the name Black Sabbath, and with it, they found a direction: riffs that sounded like warning bells, lyrics filled with dread, and a presence that felt unlike the optimism of the era. A crucial part of Black Sabbath's sound came from Tony Iommi's guitar. His playing was not only heavy by choice, but partly shaped by necessity. The band became known for down-tuned guitars, giving their riffs a darker, thicker tone that felt physically imposing. This lower sound helped separate Sabbath from other rock groups. Instead of sparkling solos or cheerful progressions, Iommi built huge, repetitive riffs that locked in with Geezer Butler's bass and Bill Ward's drums. The result was music that felt like machinery moving through fog. Ozzy Osbourne's voice added another strange ingredient. He did not sing like a polished hard rock frontman. His vocals were eerie, direct, and almost chant-like, often doubling the shape of the riff. Together, the band created a sound that was simple on the surface, but emotionally massive. It was not just loud music. It was tension, weight, and atmosphere turned into songs. Black Sabbath's early albums arrived with astonishing speed and impact. Their self-titled debut, released in 1970, introduced the band's dark identity immediately. Its opening atmosphere, with ominous sounds and heavy riffs, made clear that this was not ordinary blues rock. That same year, Paranoid took them from cult curiosity to major commercial force. The album contained some of their most recognizable songs and helped define what heavy metal could be: direct, memorable, and crushing. Then came Master of Reality in 1971, often cited as one of the key albums in metal's development. Its thick guitar tone, slower tempos, and massive riffs influenced generations of doom, stoner, and sludge metal bands. In just 3 albums, Black Sabbath established a musical language that countless artists would study. The pace was remarkable. In barely a few years, they went from a renamed Birmingham band to architects of an entire genre. One reason Sabbath mattered so deeply was that their darkness had substance. The occult imagery attracted attention, but their songs often dealt with fear, war, addiction, alienation, and social unease. This made the band's horror-inspired style feel connected to real life rather than pure fantasy. The early 1970s were not only about peace signs and festival idealism. They were also marked by political tension, economic uncertainty, and the shadow of war. Black Sabbath gave those feelings a sound. Geezer Butler, who contributed heavily to the band's lyrics, helped shape a worldview that was bleak but not empty. The band's songs often sounded like warnings. They were fascinated by evil, but not always celebrating it. In many cases, they were describing what happens when people lose control, when power corrupts, or when society turns cold. That complexity helped their music survive long after the shock value faded. After their first 3 landmark albums, Black Sabbath did not simply repeat the formula. Volume 4 in 1972, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in 1973, Sabotage in 1975, Technical Ecstasy in 1976, and Never Say Die in 1978 showed a band stretching beyond the most basic version of heaviness. They experimented with more progressive structures, broader arrangements, and different textures. This evolution was both creative and risky. Some fans wanted only the crushing simplicity of the early records, while the band itself was changing under pressure from success, touring, substances, and internal strain. The later Ozzy-era albums contain moments of brilliance, but also signs of instability. Black Sabbath had become an institution, yet the original chemistry was wearing down. By the end of the 1970s, the band that had helped invent heavy metal faced a difficult question: could Black Sabbath survive if its most recognizable voice was gone? In 1979, Ozzy Osbourne was fired from Black Sabbath. For many bands, losing a frontman that distinctive would have been fatal. But Black Sabbath made a bold move by bringing in Ronnie James Dio, formerly of Rainbow. Dio did not try to be Ozzy. His voice was more controlled, dramatic, and heroic, with a different lyrical imagination. The result was Heaven and Hell in 1980, an album that revitalized the band and proved Sabbath could transform without abandoning heaviness. Mob Rules followed in 1981, with drummer Vinny Appice replacing Bill Ward during this era. The Dio lineup gave Black Sabbath a sharper, more mythic quality. Where Ozzy-era Sabbath often sounded paranoid and haunted, Dio-era Sabbath sounded grand, fiery, and battle-ready. Their first authorized live album, Live Evil, captured the power of that version of the band, even as tensions behind the scenes continued to build. After Dio and Appice departed, Black Sabbath entered one of the most turbulent periods in its history. Tony Iommi became the central constant, the keeper of the name and the sound, while the lineup shifted repeatedly. In 1983, the band recorded Born Again with Ian Gillan, then formerly of Deep Purple, on vocals, with Bill Ward returning on drums. Soon after, Geezer Butler, Ward, and Gillan were gone, leaving Iommi to rebuild again. The mid to late 1980s and early 1990s brought vocalists including Glenn Hughes and Tony Martin, as well as a rotating cast of bassists and drummers. Tony Martin became the most enduring singer of this period, recording albums such as The Eternal Idol, Headless Cross, and Tear. This era is sometimes overlooked, but it reveals something important: Black Sabbath was no longer just a fixed lineup. It had become a musical idea anchored by Iommi's guitar. The 1990s continued that complicated pattern of reunions, departures, and reinventions. In 1991, Iommi reunited with Geezer Butler, Ronnie James Dio, and Vinny Appice to create Dehumanizer, released in 1992. The album brought back a heavier, darker Dio-fronted Sabbath sound, fitting a decade when metal itself had splintered into many forms. But the reunion did not last. Dio and Appice left again by the end of 1992, and Tony Martin returned for Cross Purposes in 1994 and Forbidden in 1995. By then, the band's commercial position had changed. Newer metal scenes had taken over the spotlight, many of them influenced by Sabbath but aimed at younger audiences. Still, Black Sabbath's persistence mattered. Even when they were unfashionable, the DNA of their riffs could be heard everywhere, in doom metal, thrash, grunge, alternative metal, and beyond. In 1997, the original lineup of Tony Iommi, Ozzy Osbourne, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward reunited. For longtime fans, this was more than nostalgia. It was the return of the four people whose chemistry had created the original Sabbath atmosphere. The live album Reunion, released in 1998, documented that comeback and reminded listeners that the earliest version of the band still carried enormous power. They toured sporadically until 2005, but the Sabbath story remained complicated. In the late 2000s, the Mob Rules lineup of Iommi, Butler, Dio, and Apis reunited under the name Heaven and Hell. This allowed them to celebrate the Dio-era material without being trapped in comparisons to the Ozzy years. They released The Devil You Know in 2009, a final studio statement from that lineup, before Ronnie James Dio's death in 2010 brought that chapter to an end. The original lineup resumed activity again in 2011, but the reunion was not complete for long. Bill Ward departed before the recording of 13, the band's final studio album, released in 2013. Even without Ward on the album, 13 was presented as a return to the spirit of early Sabbath, heavy riffs, dark themes, and a deliberate connection to the band's roots. It was commercially successful and gave the group a final major studio chapter. By then, Black Sabbath had sold more than 70 million records, and their reputation had grown beyond normal rock success. They were not just popular, they were historically central. They had already been inducted into the UK Music Hall of Fame in 2005 and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. They had Grammy recognition, including awards for Best Metal Performance and a Lifetime Achievement Award. Black Sabbath's farewell carried special weight because the band had always been tied to Birmingham. Their last concert for 8 years took place in their home city in 2017, closing a circle that had begun in working-class rehearsal rooms nearly 5 decades earlier. Occasional partial reunions followed, including a notable moment when Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi performed at the closing ceremony of the 2022 Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Then, on July 5, 2025, the original lineup reunited for a final show titled Back to the Beginning at Villa Park. It was presented as a final performance for both Black Sabbath and Ozzy as a solo artist. Ozzy Osbourne died 17 days later, giving the event an even more profound sense of closure. The story that began with 4 Birmingham musicians searching for a darker sound ended where it started, in the city that shaped them. Black Sabbath's legacy is difficult to overstate. They have been called part of the unholy trinity of British hard rock and heavy metal alongside Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, but Sabbath's particular contribution was unique. They made heaviness feel like a world, not just a volume setting. MTV ranked them the greatest metal band of all time, VH1 placed them near the top of its hard rock artists list, and Rolling Stone included them among the greatest artists ever. But the deeper proof is in the music that followed. Every slow, crushing riff in doom metal, every dark metal atmosphere, every band that turns anxiety into sound owes something to Sabbath. Their career was messy, full of lineup changes and contradictions, but their core achievement remains clear. Black Sabbath did not merely play heavy metal. They gave it a birthplace, a mood, and a shadow that still stretches across music today. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.